building something that is your own. And there's no other place where that gratification can come from, than the full ownership of an idea that goes on. And there are successes and failures along the way, but certainly whenever you get it right, there's great pride in that. One of the things that my dad struggled with in his tooling and die shop was cash flow, and he was born in 1928, and so Joplin, Missouri was where he was based, and so he knew of this Sam Walton thing going on here in Arkansas. As he told the story, he had some opportunities to slide into like a consumer packaged goods kind of thing that just didn't make sense to him. What he did slide into, though, to keep the cash flowing was in the 70s, there was this apparel item called overalls. If you remember those, like the stripes and the flowers, and I mean, they were quite the fashion thing there for a while. But it was still a steady business, though, for people who actually, wore overalls for a living. And he made the buckles. Anyway, so that was his cash cow. So, even though he wasn't in consumer packaged goods, the whole thing is about keeping the cash flowing. And what is that product, that you can find that it may not be very sexy, but at least it's going to at least keep that cash flowing. And so those are the kinds of things that I understand really well, and I have a lot of passion for that stuff whenever I'm thinking through, products that are selling, and whenever I'm talking to buyers, it's, profit is great, but also what's going to keep your product turning, what's turning on your shelf. And so from a category management standpoint, we have to be really conscious of that. So that's a little bit of a personal background. The work that I do today, I run the Global Consumer Insights facing team with Walmart. So at Walmart, there are my company, Information Resources, Inc. We are a syndicated data provider, and AC Nielsen is our competitor, but we play in the same space where we buy retailers' data, and then we provide the service of kind of aggregating the data, and we sit on massive databases that are to UPC level, to store level by week. And so as products go across the register, we track those sales. That's the POS side of our database. All right, so every time there's something running across the the register, it's scanned in, that loads into our database, and we get weekly feeds on this from all of our participating retailers in the US. We also have a household panel side of the data set where we have a panel of 100,000 people, and actually IRI and Nielsen share that panel. We call that the factory, where people use their smartphones, and so as you buy an item, your agreement with us is that you will scan that item, and you'll tell us, you may have to record the price, but you need to tell us where you bought it, and not so much time of day, but we need to know the place that you bought it. And we have information about you. When you sign up as a panelist, we know that you have a household income of this, and you live in this zip code, and we know some demographic information about you. And that's different from the POS. The point of sale data doesn't tell us the why behind the buy. It doesn't tell us about the shopper. It doesn't tell us anything about the demographics. It doesn't tell us anything about what motivated you to buy that product. It may have been that it was on deal. It may be that it was, and deal means feature or display or a price reduction, something like that. That may be the reason you bought the product. And then the other thing is your demographics. It feels very Big Brother. My mother-in-law really struggles with what I do for a living. She says I'm part of the problem, in America these days. The old Big Brother or cookie tracking, that kind of stuff. That's not, we don't know your social security number, but we do know that, whenever I purchase a product, I am a woman of this age, and I have this many kids, and I live in this zip code, and I have this income level, and so on. And then I get spun into a group of people who are similar to me, and then we look at overarching trends in the United States. So that's what the demographic data does. So even though I've given all of that information, into a system, it doesn't mean that they know that Val Wilson specifically bought this product for this price. It's not really that spooky. We just get spun into a database that way. So that's the panel side of the data. The reason that I love the work that I do today is because this is the first time in my career I've been able to sit on all of the data. Getting me to this point, I followed my father's footsteps and I studied engineering. And after about 5 years, I figured out this just really isn't what I want to do. And I had an opportunity to teach at a place at the school where I got my master's degree. And after a few years of that, my professional cohort said, you need to either decide is you is or is you ain't going to be a professor. Because I had a master's degree, and they're like, this is a terrible ROI on your education, because I was only making $22,000 a year and I was working 20 hours a week. And so that was the point, and then through a bunch of other things, I just decided, I need to figure out, I need to use my MBA. And as it turned out, we were moving to Northwest Arkansas, and I landed at NWAC. And I was teaching in the market analyst program. And I didn't know at that point in time anything about retail. I was one of those shoppers that just showed up at the store, and I took for granted that all the product was on the shelf. And I always thought it was kind of strange. Why is it children's cereal is right at eye level where my kids are? I don't want to buy that stuff for them, but I'm pushing them through on the cart, and they want all the sugary stuff. And I was like, why does that happen? They're sabotaging me. Well, I didn't understand that there's a whole science out there about placement on the shelf. And I didn't get that. I was in NWAC teaching people how to do this category management thing. The reason I was hired was because I was in big data before it was big data. So I was hired by Kraft Foods out of that experience to crunch their numbers. And I'm going to tell you a Kraft Food story as I get through this presentation. But the whole thing of the big data and how you as a small entrepreneurial CPG manufacturer can make the data stick is a very tricky, it's a sticky widget, that's a tough thing to do, especially when you're beginning. So what do you do if you're not in a major retailer, you're O Baby Foods, and you're in what we would call an alternate channel? We don't do a real good job tracking natural and health food stores. We're doing a better job of that. Our panelists do a great job tracking that kind of thing. But the POS side of the database, we just don't really track that stuff. So what do you do if you're in that space? How do you sell your product in through a fact-based sales story? And that's what I'm here to help you through today. And I should be able to get done and answer some questions as we go through. But my purpose today is to try to help you understand where the data comes from and what it means to you and how you make it stick. And also to understand that true category managers, even though they work for a giant, massive company, if they're doing their job correctly, they can help you out. And your buyer may have to be the sheriff of that process, but if they're doing their job well, they should be able to help you out. And I have an example of that here pretty soon. So, when you think about the store, I love this graphic. It came off of TED Talks. But as you think about all of the products that are in a store, it is a sea of UPCs out there. I mean, you are competing against a bunch of stuff. And so the salsa example, how many salsa brands can you name? All right, you take the explosion of brands, and then you take the explosion of UPCs within each one of those brands, and that's just maybe 8 feet of the shelf. And then you look at what the rest of that buyer responsibility is in the rest of that aisle or across that store, that is a daunting task. And so if you get 15 minutes with your buyer, you got to make it work. So all of the things that we've heard today about being prepared, having your numbers, being on top of your inventory situation, your raw materials, all of that is very true. If that buyer happens to have a moment to call you, you got to be ready, because looking at this and thinking about life through their lens, they've got a lot on their plate. So be persistent, continue to call them, but think about it through their lens. They have a lot of products that are being managed in that store. And as well as that, if they choose your product, think of what an honor that is. Because out of the sea of UPCs available, the fact that you're on the shelf really is a miracle when you think about it. So it's a big deal if you land it. It's not to discourage you at all. These great success stories come along all the time, but you really have to be prepared for what makes you unique and different. What is your proposition that's going to grow sales in the category? Think about that picture. And it's on, by the way, this is TED Talks. It's one of my favorite, it's a lecture series that's out there, really good think tank, and it's out there on the TED Talks website, so you can grab it if you are inclined to. All right, so the classic category management process, all the categories do have a definition. So what makes oral care? One of the, as a validator, early in my stint at IRI, we were pulled in to validate some numbers that Procter & Gamble had presented and that Colgate had presented. And they were very different in their definition of oral care. Well, it turned out that, it wasn't that one was trying to sabotage the other or anything. It's just that oral care, in one view, included denture care, and in the other view, oral care did not. All right, so the category definition is very important. The business unit definition is very important. Where do you play in that store? And that varies retailer by retailer. So you have to be cognizant of what exactly is the definition of the category, and then that determines really how you position yourself. What is the role of the category? So is this going to be something that maybe drives people into the store? Is it a necessity on the shelf, a necessity on the list? There's any number of reasons why the category really exists. So we've defined it, but then what is its role in the store? Is it seasonal? Is this something that is, everybody needs it? Is it something that is trendy? What are the reasons for the category to exist? We assess the category, which really just means that we measure it. We measure it with a scorecard, and so there are all the metrics that go with that. I'll take you through some basic measures here. These next few slides, we'll just talk about 5 key measures. And then also the strategy of the category. So, we start to think about things of, price, promotion, place, those kinds of things. Tactics roll into that. And then we develop a plan and we implement it, and then we review it. And it's a continual, perpetual cycle. So the category management steps, this is, fairly universal. It changes. It's a 7-step process for some and a 5 for others. But anyway, the point is that we cover all of these ideas of what are the new items, what are the trends, what are the reasons for being for these items on the shelf, the mix of the products, so we can't have a salsa category that is all premium. We have to have, the other stuff too. We have to have brand recognition. We have to have something that's going to lure people into the category. There are different opportunities with the mix within the category that we have to pay attention to. What are price and promotional strategies? What are the best times to offer these promos? How are we going to promote? Are we going to demo, or are we going to just put a pallet out there on the floor? A lot of different strategies with that. And then finally, the shelf layout, very important. Where exactly do we position your product? So private label, if somebody's after that, maybe someone will dig for that on the bottom of the shelf. We typically don't give those kinds of items premium placement on the shelf. If it's a highly profitable item, private label may be, but if it's a profitable high dollar ring item, maybe we'll tend to put that more in the middle of the shelf. So there are strategies as to where a product winds up on the shelf. As you're analyzing your numbers, shelf placement could affect whether you're up or down from year to year. If you got moved from here to here and your sales are down, that location could be part of what drove your sales down. Location on the shelf is critically important, and you have to pay attention to that whenever you're on top of the sales once you hit the shelf. there's a heck of a lot of numbers. All of those products that I showed you on the previous slide, there's a lot of numbers that we crunch through in order to build these stories. As you think about your scorecard, and that's what I'm going to go into next, there are really 5 key metrics that you need to think about through the buyer's lens. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Whenever you think about your product through the lens of the buyer, you have to keep in mind, we've already talked about the sales of the item, the profitability of the item, and then the turns. All right, those are the 3 big ones. All right, so what drives those numbers really are then turns, sales, inventory, margin, and in-stock. And we'll go through those metrics here in just a couple of minutes. But those are really the 5 key scorecard measures that you're going to be evaluated against. So again, you have to think of this through the buyer's lens. You've landed on the shelf. Now the battle is staying on the shelf. And you have to think about these things through the way that the people selling your product are thinking about it, because they're measured against this. They may like you as a person, can't take it personally, but it's not a personality game by that point. All right, so I've already mentioned that the places the data comes from to arrive at these are, we have POS sales. So POS sales is going to be really just the basics. So this is the units that are sold, this is the price for which they were sold. It doesn't have anything really to do with inventory levels, but it does have to do with the attributes of we track the attributes of the item, and we can group things together that way. But anyway, these are really the basics of the price, the sales, and the distribution. And so distribution is really how many stores are you in. That comes into play whenever I have the sales velocity example here in just a couple of slides. All right, then we also have causal data. So we're looking at, as well as the distribution, we're also looking at the feature and the display. If there's a price reduction, we take that into account. And so those are major pieces of the data that affect margin, that affect sales velocity measures and that kind of thing. And then we also have then household panel data, which that's all of your shopper insight information. So that's who's buying my product, where are they buying it, seasonally, are some demographic groups more prone to buy this item than others? Those kinds of things are what gets blended through the panel data we see. All right, so we have the 5 main measures. The place the measures come from are then these databases that hold the data, so POS and then also panel. Retailers have their own database, and then the syndicated suppliers have really everybody else's stuff. And so you're always going to be compared how you're doing at a specific retailer and then what the rest of the market is doing. They're very interested in understanding their share and how share is going up or down, and that's how those are tracked. All right, so the 5 key performance measures, staying on the shelf is really, there's no wizardry with this. It's not a popularity game. It isn't anything like that. It just comes down to the numbers. It really is not a sleight of hand. It's just strictly how are you doing in your sales performance. The key metric is sales. So this is just simply the dollars collected at the register. So as your item scans across, it's just simply what is the price of the item and then how many of them did you buy. Pretty simple math. All right, the next piece of this though is much more interesting for you. Sales measure 1.5 is sales velocity. Now this is very important to you, and notice this little picture up here of the Jell-O cup. When I was at Kraft, Kraft, makes Jell-O, refrigerated Jell-O, right? And they make a ton of it, and it sells around the nation a lot of volume. I don't remember specifically how many millions of dollars of Jell-O are pumped through those stores, but it is a lot. So if you were a small little Jell-O dessert manufacturer, how do you ever compete with something like Kraft Foods Jell-O? How do you get the shelf space? How do you justify being there? Well, there was a product called Lulu's And she's a very interesting woman, and you can look her up on, you can Google her, Lulu's Gelatin Desserts. But anyway, she started this business really out of her house, and I think she's based in Miami, Florida. But you'll notice that the colors of the Jell-O are the colors of the Mexican flag. So guess who her target demographic is? Hispanics. And guess what stores she sells that stuff? I mean, her sales velocity, so sales velocity is how many dollars or units are selling per store per week. So Lulu's was only, at the time that I was on the Jell-O desk, Lulu's was only in, I think, 20 Walmart stores in Miami. She just kind of, you know, through a relationship similar to the Oh Baby thing, she just kind of like wound up getting in to a group of stores in Miami. And her sales velocity was 5 times what Jell-O was doing. Yeah. Now, if I would have just done a ranking, just a simple ranking of Jell-O sales all across the U.S., I would have never found Lulu's. But I found Lulu's in these few stores, and I went to the buyer and I said, hey, are you aware that this is going on with Lulu's? And then also, we had the syndicated information, and we found out that Walmart was losing a ton of share, or they were losing sales. Although they were doing well in those stores, they weren't keeping up with their competition in that particular area of the United States, in that market. And so the buyer then went to Lulu, and her problem was her distribution at the time. She was really a very small operator. Well, anyway, the rest of the story is Lulu's then wound up getting placed into the high Hispanic stores. You know, it's not a nationwide product, doesn't need to be, but she was able to build out the rest of her business with not only Walmart, but other manufacturers. And the whole reason for this is because of the sales velocity analysis. It's not all about total sales. Where Lulu is relevant, she's relevant. And there's all these then line extensions that came out of that. It's not just, you know, green, yellow, red, or green, white, red Jell-O that she makes. She makes a lot of other flavors too now. But it's a really cool story and a great example of then, as a small business person, sales velocity is really, that's your sweet spot. Because if your product is relevant, if you're in the right stores where people are going to buy your product, you do stand up well among the giants. And so keep that in mind, that's a key metric for you. Sales is based, velocity is based on what are you selling, but specifically what stores are you in? You're only in 20? That's fine. You could be doing 5 times the volume of a huge competitor in those stores where you're relevant. And that's a weekly measure. So it's a rate of sales is what sales velocity is. And that's a very important metric for you. All right, inventory. Your buyer is going to be very concerned about inventory. And that's just simply how much of the product do you have on hand in the store and also in the warehouses. There's really 2 different spaces for that. But in the store, in the warehouses, how much of it is there at the retail price? So that's not the price that actually goes across the register. The number that's on the buyer scorecard is the retail price that is agreed upon and the units on hand. So a critical measure that your buyer is going to be very interested in, we know that they're evaluated against it, and so you have to be cognizant of how your product is moving through. Inventory and the sales connect to margin. So margin is what have I sold the product for versus what is the cost. And there are a lot of different ways of measuring margin. You know, there's net maintain margin and oh, wow, okay. Yeah, maintain margin and so on, and there's a lot of different ways to cut margin, but the point is this is really profit. So the buyer is very interested in this one. And it's typically expressed in a %, and financiers get very excited about this measure. All right, the 4th measure is in-stock %. So for a small business person, this is really important to you, and this is a very stressful point, because how is your ability as a manufacturer to keep the product flowing into the store? This is a tough one because, you know, anticipating demand whenever you've got short supply, tough thing to do. And so some buyers have to make the choice, you're never in stock. Love your product, but we got to figure some way for you to keep the product on the shelves and flowing and in my stores. And so they're very interested in the in-stock, which is related then to the retail turns. So I've got my inventory and I've got my sales. How is that flowing through my store? Am I being stung on my inventory investment? Or, I can't just load my stores with your product. It has to make sense for what the shelf capacity is. And I have to be able to keep that stuff flowing through my store, because cash flow for the buyer is related to your cash flow too. So how are we keeping it turning? All right, so those are the 5.5 retail measures that you need to be very concerned about. This makes you relevant to your buyer. So you talk to them about your marketing problems and your capacity constraints and this kind of thing, but the buyer at the end of the day is evaluated on these things. And so how do you make yourself speak their language? How do you get to this information? All right, when you sell with with Walmart, there's a thing called Retail Link, and that's where all of your data is. And so you can, once you sign your contract, you can get access to all of this data. On the syndicated side, you have to buy it, and it is very expensive, and a lot of the manufacturers won't do that. So you're kind of reliant then on your rest of market measures to come from other places. Now, other retailers, you have, they'll let you see their data and so on. But getting into the larger picture of where else your products are selling, that is really a retailer by retailer view. Okay. Measures. You are still awake. I was worried after lunch. I was kind of like, I don't know. All right, but I know the numbers. The reason that I'm lucky and I do what I do is because not a lot of people like to do what I do. So it's a supply and demand thing. So I'm happy if you think that this is boring work, because it keeps me in demand. And as I age, I'm really happy about that. But this is exciting stuff, because this is going to be you once you sell your product in using fact-based sales. It's an exciting place to be once you understand then how the buyer's language is spoken and where you get your numbers. That's a critical thing whenever you sign your contract with them, is how am I being evaluated and where do I get that information? All right, so the syndicated side is a little bit of a slippery slope. It costs a lot of money to get into this. So if you can't afford the data set from the syndicated side, Nielsen, IRI, we've got retailer data, we have rest of market. If you can't get into these databases, eventually you can, and you have to make the commitment that you need the data. It's not crazy expensive, but it is a cost, and you may not be prepared to bear that cost. Then where do you go to get consumer insights? The internet has leveled the playing field. So these retailers are going to have databases of their own. And if you're selling into these companies, chances are you'll be able to see your own data within these spaces. Not your competitors, that's what category managers do. But you'll be able to see your stuff, and that's really important. The internet, though, is really leveled the playing field, and there's a ton of information out there from the consumer standpoint of what's making your product sell. There's a lot of information out there that's ready for you to access if you just start to Google. I chose Google for the big middle piece. What is the product you sell? And just start Googling the heck out of that thing. And you'll find all kinds of trend information out there. Demographics, if your business is driven by demographics, you can know exactly where the sweet spots are for your target demographic by using census data. If your product is weather driven, NOAA, the National Oceanographic and whatever group, atmosphere group, that data, you might need to hire a teenager or something to crunch that stuff, because it's a mess when you pull it out of the database, but very rich information through NOAA. The CDC, if you're in something that's in over-the-counter meds, the CDC has great information out there, and it's free. Okay, all right, then the rest of these, a lot of great consumer insight information out there that I use. I call it Google journalism. You can use it too, because most of it's free. So don't hesitate to get out there and look through these. All right, last thing, one word of caution. If you use internet sources for your insights, make sure that you vet the data. Wikipedia is a great place, but some of the stuff can be kind of shady, so check it, validate it, and then be sure that you reference your sources. All right, so that's on a shoestring budget. Once you get on the shelf, this is what you need to do. But good luck.
You'll be around at the reception, right?
Yeah, I'll be at the reception.
So make sure you track her down because there's some other insights that she can provide to you. I mean, they do data pools too. If you just need to call and get some data, they can do that for you at much lower cost. The other thing you want to try to get from her, before you go out and start selling your product into any retailer, and you want to grow market share, you need to find out, do they sell their data? If they sell their data, that's how you show up on a blip. If you're selling to local stores and they don't sell their data, you can't show that you have market share. If you're showing them a spreadsheet, here's what I shipped, here's what I sold, you made it up on your home computer. I mean, there's no validation there.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right.
Validate.
Yes. Valerie, thank you very much. Okay.